Okay, here we go. So yesterday we started learning the sugya of when do payers become a chuyev and meiser? When do they become tevel? I said two different things, and they're not necessarily, depending on the Rishonim, it might not necessarily mean the same thing. But for now, I'll say, when does it become tevel? Those Rishonim will hold it's tevel anyway, but it doesn't. But you're not mechuyev to take off meiser yet. But I'll call upon them with our machlokes is between Rabbi Yanai, who says when it gets into the house, and between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yochanan, who says when it gets into your chutzner. The Gemara said, according to Rabbi Yanai, it has to get into your house. It has to go through the chutzner. It's got to come into the main entrance. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, it says house to tell you that when it comes into the chutzner, it has to be mishtamer. That is the machlokes that we had, and we are now up to Mosiv, which is 8 lines down from the top of Pehei Amar Aleph. Hayom shloisha ushloishim yom shehem arba shavuos v'chavish yom la'omer. Everyone knows that Lag BaOmer is a very, very big Yom Tiv in Lakewood. You know why? Because the code word for it is Had Shabahad.
Yeah, okay.
Ah, I think here. Zok the Gemara. Moshe Rav Chanina. Rav Chanina can have a kasha. Say on Rabbi Yochanan and say on Rabbi Yanai. It says as follows. Moshe Rav Chanina Chuzah. Kinavshach. When we were learning about the rule of the poil that we just learned, that he's allowed to eat on the job, we said it's kanavshach. The poil can eat just like the balabayis can eat. Kanavshach, like the balabayis can eat, kach navshoy shal poil. That's how the poil can eat. Ma navshach oichel upater. Just like the navshach, you're allowed to eat pears before it gets into the house, in the field. The balabais is allowed to eat those pears, and it's not yet mechuyev and meiser. Af nafshoy shel poyel oichelu potter, and we learned that the chiddush was you would think it blives like a mekach, and the mekach now makes it mechuyev and meiser. Kamash v'lon, that when the poyel gets to eat in the field, he does not have to take off meiser from them. Holoikeach, so medayik that holoikeach would be chayiv. Davke, an employee, is allowed to eat from the pears in the field, and there's no chiyuv meiser. But if someone actually came out to the field and purchased it from the owner, that in and of itself creates a gemar melocha. Freit the gemara my love v'soda. Pashas we're talking about in the soda. Now mekach, if mekach makes it into a gemar melocha that you should be chiyuv and meisers, surely if you actually did do a gemar melocha, meaning you piled it up, you made miruach b'kri, you piled it up in the pile, that should surely be a gemar malacha that would be mechayev and meisris, which is shver because Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yanai both say it has to be either brought into the chutzner or into the house. So even if it's like a complete gemar malacha in the field, it still will not be mechayev and meiser. Yet from this pasuk, from this dik, it's mashma that a gemar malacha in the field would be mechayev you with meiser. Omar Papa. Hacha b'te'ena ha'emedes begina v'noife noiter lachatzer haskina. Avada, it would not considered, wouldn't be considered a gemar malacha by grain in the field to be mechayiv. But what type of gemar malacha would be mechayiv you? If the case over here with this sale that would be chayiv is speaking where there's a tree whose trunk is in the garden, which is not in the chutzner, and its branches are leaning over into the garden. So when you're picking them in the garden, and that's why there's a chiyuv. Because Sai Kon Rabbi Yanai, Sai Kon Rabbi Yochanan, when he picked it, it was either in the chutzner or it was in the house. Therefore, it's chayiv. The noita. That would be according to Rabbi Yochanan, where if it's even in the chutzner, it's considered a gemar malacha. Ulaman damer lebayis, and according to Rabbi Yanai, that it has to be in the house. Lebayis is speaking where the tree was hanging over into the house. When you cut it, it was in the house directly. Gewaltig. Zogt the Gemara, zogt Rashi lechatzer, noit lechatzer, the michi tolsha. As soon as you cut it, it's in the pnei chater, so therefore it's not shver, that even though it's not in the chater, it's a gemar malacha. That's not true. Here it's speaking where it was, when it's cut, it's instantly in the bayis or in the chater. Fact gemara, if that's the case, yachi balabayis nami nechai. We're saying dafka loikeach is chai, but the balabayis won't be chai. Why not? When he cut it, it's in his bayis. When he cut it, it's in his chater. And for the gemara, balabayis einov b'teinasai. When the balabayis is looking at this tree, he's looking at the whole tree and the well-being of the whole tree, because the whole tree is his. So from his perspective, that tree is in the gina. It's not in his house. It's not in his chatzah. But v'lakeach, all he cares about is the actual product, the actual fruit that he purchased. Einov b'mekach. Let's see Rashi. The balabais einov b'teinasai. Ein hanoiv choshav b'einov. The branch is not so important to him. The main thing is the main trunk of his tree. We look at it like the whole tree, everything is in the gina, not in the chater, not in the bayis. Until the entire tree is harvested. The kanis lebayis and the fruit harvested are brought into the home. Lav gemar malachu, that's not a gemar malacha for the bailam. But the lakeach, he doesn't care about the tree. He just cares about what he purchased from the tree. Those cut pears that lakeach bought, those are the ikr, and therefore we should nitlashu bol lebayis. And as soon as there's nitlash, they're in the house, and therefore the pears of lakeach are chayiv and true. Frank the Gemara, it's machma. We have a dik from a pasuk. Dafke the poyos ladi halakeach can't eat. So there's a deraisa telling me that the lakeach who buys it can't eat. Frank the Gemara, lakeach mi deraisa mi mechayiv. Are you telling me that this that we said that the lakeach makes it into a gemar malacha, that creates a chiyuv of being mafresh trumas and maishris? That's a din deraisa. But Tanya, we learned in the brisa. Why did the stores of Beis Hinai get destroyed 3 years before the main Churban? Why did they get destroyed first? Zog the Gemara, and these are stores that Beis Hinai is right around the eastern portion of Yerushalayim in the Harazaisim area. It's in that area of East Jerusalem where Beis Sinai was. Why did they get destroyed? Mipnei shehamidu devreim al divrei Torah. It's because they weren't makbid on the takanos chachamim. Rather, they were content with only following the deraisa. As Rashi says, "Kloimer masha asur midivrei chachamim motzul hetem in Torah." Why? What specifically are we referring to? They used to say, Aser to Aser via Chalta. So let's look at the pasuk. Pasuk says, Aser to Aser. It's called Tfuas Arecha Hayotzi Asoda Shana Shana, and right after it says via Chalta Lufnei Hashem Leikach. So we darshan as follows: Aser to Aser via Chalta v'loy moicher. You should eat it and not selling it. Selling it does not trigger a chiyuv to take off trumas and maasros. Tvus haracha v'loy lekeach. Buying does not trigger. Buying does not trigger a chiyuv to take off trumas and maasros. So you clearly see that there is no chiyuv midaraisa. There is no chiyuv midaraisa to take off trumas and maasros if a lekeach buys pears. So now we're going to have to go back and know what the dik is from the kenavshach mashen kan lekeach. Ela midrabanan. That a lekeach has to take off trumas and maasros is only midrabanan ukra asmachta ba'am. The pasuk is only in the smach. Ela kenavshach l'mayata. And on Nomad Aleph we made a dik from the pasuk that kenavshach dafka the balabais dafka the worker is allowed to eat from the pears, but someone who buys it may not. Now that dik is not a good dik anymore because it's not true. Now we're saying even midaraisa, someone who buys it does not have to be mafresh trumas and maasros. So therefore, what is that pasuk referring to? To teach us a whole new halacha. Kinavshach, the toil is going to be like the owner. Ma navshach im chasamta pater. we know there's an Isser of Loisach Soim Shar B'Dishoy. Moshe Rubner brought it up yesterday. Now we're going to focus on it a little bit. There's an Isser of Loisach Soim Shar B'Dishoy. When your animal is threshing, you're not allowed to muzzle it. You have to let it eat from the grain that it's stomping upon. Right? That's actually tolish already. It's not mechuber. By the time the animal is threshing, it's tolish. But there's a lav loisachsim shar b'disha. So what if you muzzle yourself when you're working on your own pairs? Im chasamta potter. You're not over an isser by stopping yourself from eating. Af poil, so to a poil, your worker, im chasamta potter. If you muzzle to him, you're potter. Now, it doesn't literally mean to muzzle him. Rajas either katzatz to domim, you paid him extra so that he shouldn't eat while he's working. Or you told him, don't you dare eat. In either case, it's going to be potter. So there is no Isser loisachsim. There's loisach. The Isser loisachsim is only an ashar b'dishoy. It's not on an employee. Most of Marzutra. So that's why we learn from Kanavshach that there is no Isser to muzzle an employee. Most of Marzutra. Break Marzutra Akash. Again on Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yanai. Ezel Garnon Lemaisris. What is considered the Gemar Malacha to be Mechayiv somebody in Maisris? So Rashi Ezel Garnon shall perish Lemaisris Yekaru Goyrein Ugemar Malacha lesser Bahen Achilasar. So Bikishu and Uvidlum, these are gourds like squash and these types of things. Misha Yipkisu. What does that mean? Rashi says Misha Nitel, Misha Yinotel Pikishalen. There's some type of blossom or flower. When that falls off, that's the Gemar Malacha. V'hu perach hagodel b'roishay v'davukpay. It's some type of flower-like formation that grows at the edge of the squash and it's connected to it. Once the fruit is cut down, after a while it falls off. That's the Gemar Malacha. V'omer Abasi, Misha Yinotel Pikishalahen. Zok the Gemara. Let's understand what this price is saying. My love, Mishayiv Kasu. As soon as this flower falls off, Afilu Bisada, even though these pears are still found in the field. So it's Shver and Rabbi Yochanan and Shver and Rabbi Yanai, who respectively say that it either has to be brought into the Chatzor for the Gemar Malacha, or that it has to be brought into the house. Zok the Gemara Loi, Mishayiv Kasu Bebayis. It means after it gets into the house or the Chatzor, at that point, it's still not a Gemar Malacha for these items until the flower falls. Frank Gemara, if that's what it means, then the Brisa didn't express it properly. Because Ihachi Mishayifkesu, that's not the right expression. It should say it's not a Nigmar Malacha, even though it was in the house, Atchayifkesu, Mibayle. Mishayifkesu means as soon as this happens, it's a Gemar Malacha, even if it's not in the house. If you want to say it has to be in the house and that also needs Yifkesu, then it should say Atchayifkesu. So it's mashma, in fact, from the Lashon of Brisa, that the flower falling off is a Gemar Malacha even before it gets into the house. Zok to Gemara, Itana Achiyivkasu. If it would have said Achiyivkasu, really it means after it's in the house. You're asking, the Tana should have expressed it by saying Achiyivkasu? No. That's because Havamina Adgamar Lepikusayu. I would have thought that this flower has to be completely falled off, completely eliminated. Kamash Malon, Mishiyivkasu Michiaschule Pikusayu. When they start to fall off, even though they're still on it, that's considered the Gemar Malach. But it really means consistent to B'yam and B'yochanan only after it's either in the house or in the chutz. Masav Marzutra Bareder Avnach. Goyronoi Lemaiser L'chayev Alov. We're talking about different types of payers. One is the Goyron. So Rashi Goyroni Lemaiser L'chayev Alov B'shum Tevel. When is it considered complete the chayiv tevel? Mishatigmar malachton, when their malacha is finished. Be'ezehu gemar malachton. What does it mean gemar malacha specifically? Malachas hachnosasan, when they're brought in. My love, what does the Brisa mean with the malacha of bringing them in, gathering them in? My love hachnosasan afilu besada. It means you piled it up, even though it's still in the field. And it had not yet been brought into the chatzor or the bias like Rabbi Yana and Rabbi Yochanan. So once again, it's Shver and Rabbi Yana and Rabbi Yochanan. Zakmar loy. Achnasosan lebayis. When it says ve'ezu gemar malachton, malachas achnasosan, it doesn't mean gathering it in the field. It means gathering it into the house. Zel gemar malachton. That's one teretz. V'boy saying on this is a real change. It's what's it called? A something shift, a paradigm shift. The Ibaya Sema, Ki Kam Rabbi Yanai, when did Rabbi Yanai say that you got to bring it into the house? That's not by grain. That's only by Zaysim and Anovim, only by olives and grapes. The Lav B'nei Goyrin Inhu, because they normally don't get piled up in the field. They're either made into wine or they're brought into the house. As Rashi says, we're talking about the novimization that are lachila. There's also a chiyuv to take ma'aser min Torah, which is a massive machlokes rishonim. A Rashi holds there's a chiyuv to take ma'aser min Torah on the novimization. The chiyuv in the lav degoyin, since they're normally not piled up in a pile like grain is, they don't have any other kviyas. So this now we can go back to all of Friedeke prices. As a garden of in the field, or even going back to Amar Aleph when we had a kasha from Kanaf Shach. If you buy it in the field, mashma in the field, it's not a Gemar Malacha. That all changes because now we're saying for grain in the field is a Gemar Malacha, even in the field once it's piled up. This whole thing that Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Yochanan said that the Gemar Malacha doesn't occur until it's brought into the house or into the Chatzar, that's only applying to Zaysim and Anovim, which don't have any other Gemar Malacha, and it's only there where Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Yochanan expressed their opinion about coming in. Now, I'm not sure why the Gemara is only addressing Rabbi Yanai. He come Rabbi Yanai b'Zaysim and Anovim. I would assume it's Rabbi Yochanan as well, because the kasha is equally on Rabbi Yochanan as it is on Rabbi Yanai. Does the article say anything about that? Kikam Rabbi Yanai, does the article say this also applies to Rabbi Yochanan? I don't see why it shouldn't. Kikam Rabbi Yanai b'Zaysim v'Anovim, I think that should equally apply to Rabbi Yochanan. Anybody? Mm-hmm. Of those words, Ki Ka'amar Rabbi Yanai b'Zaysim v'Anovim Alav b'nei Goyim. You don't think? Okay. So let's do an inventory of what we've learned so far. Zok Gemara. We have a pasuk. We have the pasuk of the Chermesh. From that pasuk, we learn that a person, a poil, is allowed to eat from the wheat that he's cutting, from any fruit that he's cutting while he's cutting it, right? That we learned already. The shor batolish. We also know there's an Isser Deraisa Sachsim Shor B'Dishai, meaning the shor, you're not allowed to stop him from eating when he's working on already cut, already harvested produce. But what about Adam Batolish? Right? The Mishnah says that the Adam Batolish is also allowed to eat. Where do we know that from? We haven't yet found the makar for that. Adam Batolish Minolam. How do you know when a person, a poil, is working on fruit that's tolish and he's processing them, threshing, winnowing? How do we know there that the poil is allowed to eat? It's a kalvachimer mishar. What's a kalvachimer? Umashar sheino eichel b'mechuber madach shor, where the Torah never addresses that you have to feed a shor with mechuber lakarka. The Torah only addresses leisachsim shor b'dishay. Nevertheless, oichel b'tolish, because it says leisachsim shor b'dishay. Adam, a person she'oichel b'mechuber, we have psukim of kisavai b'kamash reyecha that tells you that an Adam can eat b'mechuber a poil. Surely, surely he should be able to eat betolish. Frank Gemara, it's not a good kalvachimer. Because malashar, you know why shar can eat betolish? There's a lav loisachsim shar b'dishay, but there's never a lav on the chasima of an employee. So Frank Gemara, well, maybe take it a step further. Maybe using the same kalvachimer, maybe we should apply the lav the chasima on the person as well. Madach Ashor, where there's no mitzvah to help a shor that's struggling. Nevertheless, at the mitzvah chasim you're mechuyev to unmuzzle an animal. Adam shat mitzvah a person who is a chiyuv to help. Ein idin surely shat mitzvah chasim surely to be usher to make a chasima on a file. But that's not a good kal v'chomer because we have a pasuk that we just learned at the top of Amar Beis tells us not like that. Amar kra kenavshecha kenavshe shel poyel. Man navshoy, just like the person himself in chasmasay potter, he's potter if he muzzles himself. A poyel, so to a poyel in chasmasay pot. So there is no lav de chasima on a person. Dr. Gemara, so ve'ela adam betolish minala. The kal v'chomer from shore doesn't work. So oy bazoi, because the reason why the shore could eat betolish is because it has a lav de chasima. A person doesn't have a lav de chasima. Who said there'll be an iser betolish? So how do you know that a person's allowed to eat betolish? A worker's allowed to eat betolish? Amakra kama base pa'amim. Where does it say kama base pa'amim? Rashi tells us kama says kisave bekamas reyecha, and then at the end it says al kamas reyecha. Right? Kisave bekamas reyecha. That's number one kama. V'katavta melilas biyotcha v'chermet soisanif al kamas reyecha. Once again it says kama. So since it says kama two times, we don't need the second time. We don't need it to tell you that the poil is allowed to eat b'mechuber. Apply it to tell us that a person on the poil is allowed to eat betolish. Rabbi Ami Amar Adam betolish le'tzarich. I don't even need a separate pasuk of kama to teach you that an Adam, a poil, is allowed to eat when he's working on tolish, because it says in the pasuk Kisavai bekerem riyacha. When someone comes to work in the kerem of his friend, what is the job? What is he doing? By kama, we know what he's doing. He's cutting it down. But what does the job entail in the kerem riyacha? Milo yaskina and shesachor lakate. Isn't it possible that one of the jobs to do there was to carry out the cut grapes? So one guy's cutting the grapes, but the other guy is putting them in the basket and carrying them out. So he's working with tolish. So the pasuk of Kisave B'Kem Reyecha is directly dealing with an employee who's working with tolish. Yomer Rahman Aleicha. The pasuk says that the employee is allowed to eat. What about a shor b'mechuber? How do you know that a shor is allowed to eat b'mechuber when it's working? We know like. That does not eat betolish. An adam cannot eat betolish. Now we just said a moment ago that an adam could eat betolish, but Rashi learns means the Torah didn't directly address a person eating betolish. Nevertheless, a shor where the Torah specifically said loisachsam shor b'dishoy einay din sha'oichel b'mechuber, surely you should eat b'mechuber. Zokmer, it's not a good kal v'chomer because mala adam, you know why an adam can eat b'mechuber? Shekenat mitzvah l'achiyosay. You're mechuyev to support a person. Toimer b'shar shiat mitzvah l'achiyosay. So therefore, you can't learn from a kal v'chomer that a shor should be allowed to eat b'mechuber. Correct the Gemara, but maybe be a shor mitzvah l'achiyosay mekal v'chomer. Yes, but lachiyosa doesn't just mean to feed; it means to support it. So I don't think I think that chayosa is a higher level.
Can take it to the vet? Right?
Could be, but I think it's a higher level. Okay, so zok to Gemara be a shar mitzvah lachiyosa mekal v'chomer. It's more than that. We know you shecht animals. What type of chayosa is that? But till the point where it's supposed to be shechted, you're supposed to take care of it. So Zak to Gemara, Mal Adam Shinaka Mitzvah Lachyosa, Tama Bishar, Shiata Mitzvah Lachyosa. Zak to Gemara, so maybe be a shar Mitzvah Lachyosa Makal B'Chaim. Ma Adam Shiata Mitzvah Lachimosai. Ma Dechan Adam, where there's no issue like Sachsoin, still Ata Mitzvah Lachyosa. Shar Shiata Mitzvah Lachimosai. A shar where you're prohibited to muzzle it. Ein Adin Shiata Mitzvah Lachyosa. Amar Kra. We're specifically excluding a shar from the mitzvah of lachiyosai. Correct Gemara. So that's back to square one. How do you know that a shar is allowed to eat if it's working on a mechuber lakarka. Amakra re'echa beis pa'am. Kamash re'echa, it says, right? We don't need it to teach you to an adam b'mechuber because we have a pasuk mufurish that a person can eat b'mechuber when he's cutting down the grain. Tanayu inyan l'shar b'mechuber. Let's apply to shar b'mechuber. So now we've covered all our bases. We know that an adam who's working is allowed to eat b'mechuber. We know that an adam who's working is allowed to eat b'tolish because of the extra kama. We know a behema b'tolish could eat because it says like saksam shar b'dishay. And we know a behema can eat b'mechuber because it says re'echa 2 times and 1 is extra. Ravina Amar, I don't need psukim. Loi adam b'tolish, v'loi shar b'mechuber shrichik pray. We went through all this effort to find psukim of kama re'echa. We don't need it. The pasuk shot of the pasuk includes that. Where do you see that? The chsev loi sachshem shar b'dishay. Torah says loi sachshem shar b'dishay. Is it only a shar that you're not allowed to muzzle? What if you're using a donkey? Are you allowed to muzzle a donkey? Avada, you're not allowed to. So really, it shouldn't say l'sachsam shar b'dishay, l'sachsam b'dishay, because it's applying to all animals. Zakir b'michti, kol milu isnu b'chasima. All animals are included in the prohibition of l'sachsam shar b'dishay. The alfin and shar mi Shabbos. The same way when it mentions shar by Shabbos, it includes an isra malacha for all animals. So too, when it says shar by l'sachsam shar b'dishay, it's not exclusively an isser to a shar. It's any animal you're not allowed to muzzle. If that's the case, don't thresh b'chasima. Why mention what animal we're dealing with? Shar, the cause of Rahman alamali. Why b'chalal did the Torah stick in the shar? Alamai, it's la'kushay choysem l'nechsam l'choysem. We're comparing the human who would put the muzzle on to the animal who is muzzled. And we're comparing the animal who's muzzled to the person who is muzzling. And what is the comparison? Just like the person who's muzzling, meaning a human is allowed to eat b'mechuber when he's working for somebody. Af nechsam, so too a shor, an animal, oichel b'mechuber is allowed to eat b'mechuber. Uman nechsam oichel b'tolish. And just like an animal can eat b'tolish, it says like sachs from shor b'dishoy, af choysem, so to a human who's working oichel b'tolish. So now basically we've covered all our bases because the Mishnah tells us that a worker is allowed to eat b'mechuber and a worker is allowed to eat b'tolish. How do we know it? We have several options. We either know it from kama that says twice, or we know it from this svara of Ravina that learns it from shar. Since it says shar b'dishay, we're applying everything that applies to a shar to adam and an adam to a shar. And how do we know that the behema is allowed to eat from mechuber? The pasuk only says like sachim shar b'dishay, referring to Torah. So if you learn like Ravina, it's because you compare shar to adam. Don't look at Ravina, it's because we have an extra re'acha to say that that's also included. What we have not yet discussed is dover that's not gedulei karka. There, you don't have a heter, like if someone's working on cheese, there you don't have a heter. That will come out of its sham tomorrow. You're working in a factory that makes cheese. So there you're not allowed to eat cheese. You're allowed to eat produce as you're working on it, but not something that's not gedulei karka. That's right. So Beryl first was saying yesterday that he used to work in the Barton's chocolate factory, and the policy there was, whatever you're working on, anything in the factory, you're allowed to put it to your mouth. That sounds like a Lucy show. Okay, let's stop here. We will be mamshech tomorrow. Everyone should have a wonderful, awesome, happy Lag Ba'omer.
Shkoyach.